Hi there, and thanks again for joining this YouTube channel where I talk about my sketchbook work. The first one we'll talk about today is sketchbook number 9. Enjoy. Sketchbook number 9, the most recent one that I've managed to fill. So this one covers May last year to May this year. So it's taken me a little bit of time to fill this one. This is a typical first page, which I'm just testing the pens out really before I commit to a particular sketch. So these are the typical pens that I use, that I have been using really for the past couple of years. The Posca pens, acrylic ones, normally a very fine nib, 0.7. But what I'm doing here is just figuring out the sort of background colours and the foreground colours, and which ones kind of mix well and which ones don't. So you can see here the ones I've circled, for me anyway, look pretty good, and the other ones aren't so good. So yeah, that's all that is to begin with. And so really this sketchbook captures the sort of end of my time living in London. So I really wanted to capture as many places as possible. This particular one is with a metallic pen, again Posca, experimenting. So it's a bit of a strange one really, because when the sunlight hits the page, you have to have the sketchbook at a certain angle, which isn't always the best pen to use, but I find it worthwhile all the same. So this one is in Fitzrovia, just sat one morning having a coffee, the BT Tower there. This one I got a lot of really nice reaction from Cabman's Shelter in Russell Square in central London. And I actually had a cup of tea and a bacon sandwich afterwards with the woman that worked there. I can't remember her name now. This is going back the end of May last year. But it was a lovely sunny afternoon. And I love the history of London as well, and that's one of the reasons why I sketch. I mean, I enjoy it anyway, and I love to get an accurate description of a building or people down on a page, whether it takes 2 hours, 3 hours or more. So there was a bench opposite, sat down, relaxed, took in the view, and had a lovely conversation with the owner afterwards. So it was a fantastic afternoon really. And the history of these places, I think there's only 12 that survive. There used to be back in the day before taxis kind of stop off to have different coffee breaks wherever nowadays. These cabman shelters, as they were called, were specifically designed for taxi drivers in London. So I thought it was just a really nice bit of history. So we're really just going through a lot of the old bits and pieces of this one in particular is Spitalfields in London, and I really wanted to capture the sort of the church there, and using different colours as well. I never tend to have close-ups of buildings, and this was quite an unusual one outside a pub called the Old King's Head near London Bridge, near Borough Market. And it was just one evening, late evening, and I'd been out sketching all day, and I just thought I'd, because the architecture of this particular pub down an alleyway reminded me of places in Amsterdam, the architecture there. So I thought I'd document that. Very quick sketch, only took me 30-40 minutes, very loose. And also documenting buildings that are no longer there, that were part of people's heritage and culture. This particular one was what was left at the time of Elephant and Castle shopping centre in southeast London. So I thought I'd document that before the whole thing went completely. And again, just, you know, this is a typical page of me wanting to actually fill the whole page. And it is very repetitious. And I kind of like that actually in a sketch where you're dealing with an old Victorian building, for example, and you're really trying to put everything in the right place. But once you get going, everything is there and it's in place. And it's all sort of, this one's a good example of like a grid format. So again, 2 pens, one slightly darker than the other to get that sort of tonal difference and that background foreground image that I like to create in most of the sketching. And again, really strange sights, things that people don't necessarily know about in London. Britain's smallest police station. It's a little turret that was used right up until the 1920s, 30s. Now the council use it as just, you know, they put their brooms in there and all their cleaning equipment. But it's just a nice part of history, and this is right on the edge of Trafalgar Square, right in the heart of central London. And again, the same thing here, York Watergate, just near the Thames. This one didn't work out so well, really to do with the colours. The image itself is okay, and I'm fairly happy with it, but I think the yellow is just a little bit too yellow. It didn't really work. It needed to be a stronger colour, maybe something along the lines of this one would have been slightly better to use. But you take a risk and you take a chance sometimes with sketching, and it doesn't always work out. Mistakes will be made. This is London Coliseum. This one, surprisingly, even though it's very ornate and very intricate, didn't take me that long. Obviously, I start from the top, and I try not to go over the edge when it's something as important as this in architectural terms. But that one was a really nice. I probably spent about an hour and a half there. And really, this is one of my first visits to where I live now, Ramsgate in the southeast coast. It's a lovely harbour, a royal harbour. Lots of boats that are kind of there at all times, constantly moored. And then sort of flipping back to London. I still lived in London until October last year. The COVID memorial wall that we have here in Westminster, which is very effective when you see it. This whole wall is full of hearts that people decorate this wall with. People that have lost their loved ones in this country, and particularly in London, come to this particular wall that they designated. And it's very affecting. The whole walk is probably about a mile long. And when you walk alongside it, it really does kind of get to you. So I thought it would be a nice idea to document it in some way. Bit of Francis Bacon at the Tate. Again, a sketch that didn't work so well for me, just with this lighter pen, but it's a nice enough composition of the rooftops of Ramsgate. Back in London again at the V&A. That's one thing I do miss, actually. We have some lovely galleries here nearby in Ramsgate and in the neighbouring towns like Canterbury, but I do miss a good museum like the V&A and the British Museum. This was just an interesting composition that didn't take too long. Again, we're using the foreground, background colours that are slightly different to each other to get that illusion of depth. Royal Albert Hall, again, using that kind of same technique. This probably took me about 2 or 3 hours. The Bridge of Sighs in Oxford, that was a really nice day out. I think I only did one sketch. This took me a little bit longer than I thought that I might spend on it, but it was worth it. Slightly difficult to get the angle of the bridge underneath. Didn't quite get that right. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, these mistakes often happen, and I'm kind of setting a rod for my own back, really, because I do like to have these sketches as accurate as possible, and sometimes they don't quite work out. So you can see the white Posca pen here, trying to get rid of all the tiny mistakes that I've made. But on the whole, it was a fantastic day, and I have lots of memories of people walking past and making lovely comments, and it just being a lovely summer day last year. Pubs in London. I love pubs in London. There's so many varied shapes and sizes, and from all kinds of eras and ages. This one in particular, Ye Olde Mitre, situated in the Farringdon area, down a really small alleyway, and a typical tourist would, if they're not looking out for it, they would completely miss it and walk past. And I kind of like that about some architecture and buildings and pubs in central London. You have to really do your homework. And these ones just sort of thrown together. This one probably took me about an hour. The Thames Barrier, and the prospect of Whitby, again, a really historic old pub on the Thames, in Wapping, a really famous old pub. And these ones are more sort of in Ramsgate, so I've kind of fully immersed myself into the area by now. I've moved down, and this was based on a sketch that Van Gogh did. He actually lived in the town only for a couple of months, and he taught in a local school, and he did a pencil drawing from this exact spot about 100 years ago, so I thought I'd recreate it in my own style. Again, views of the harbour of Ramsgate from a slightly skewed angle. Wellington Crescent. And these are really sort of not too quick a sketch, but this is me sort of familiarising myself with the area. So these ones are pretty basic. This one was surprisingly warm day from early November last year, and as you can see, the water in the harbour was very calm. But I love all the masts. You can hardly see the buildings in the background. There were so many more masts than this actually, but I didn't want to go too overboard. And it's all about limiting what you want to put down on the page. Making sure that you're not sort of going too over the top, and less is more. And really, when we got into the winter here, it was too cold to stand outside for too long. So I had this idea of just filling half a page with something and then half a page with something else. So I'm really only stood on this spot for about 30 minutes, 10-15 minutes for this one, and then maybe 10 minutes to sketch this guy who was working on a boat on the harbour at the time. Introducing a lot of graffiti that we have in the area to other sketchbooks, and really having the idea of laying things, having different ideas and sort of layering things over the top. An old sort of rundown bit of the pavilion just up the road from me. This is Canterbury, really lovely view of one of the alleyways, kind of looking up towards the cathedral, and a lovely church, St Augustine's, that we have here just up the road from me. Again, a scene. I didn't particularly like this one. It's all sort of pretty much the same texture and colour, but it turned out okay. The composition's nice, but the colours didn't really work for me. And this is me, again, just experimenting with lines. Occasionally I'll do this where I put a little short film together. This is St Augustine again. And again, really just messing around with colour and lines, and drawing different figures and laying things over the top, and not really thinking too much about the end product, but just having a bit of fun. And occasionally I'd sort of go back to London to see friends and family, and go for a meal somewhere, or day trips really. So I'd have an opportunity just for a couple of hours to sketch bits and pieces of London, whether it's sort of Bishopsgate or Soho, central London. This colour combination I really like actually, the sort of dark purple with the light sort of pink. Ramsgate again. And again with a silver pen, so it doesn't reflect that well. It has to have a certain angle, but pretty successful nonetheless. It's all about composition for me. Sometimes I use the wrong pens, and that's just one of those things really. This is a lovely view sort of going down to the harbour that we have here. Fantastic sketching opportunities here, really are. And this was a flat that I rented when I first moved down, so this was the view that I had from my window, from the living room. So I thought I'd document that before I moved out. Canterbury again. Painting up a page, I often do this before I leave the house. it just gives it an extra texture, a different dimension, a slightly different tonal feel. And back to London again. This was towards the end of March, looking down the mall towards Buckingham Palace. This one didn't take too long because there's actually not much on the page. But it was quite nice to document the sun sort of coming down from the left-hand side with all the shadows of the trees coming over. Tatchell Castle on the Thames. Again, a really nice composition. And I love these two colour pens as well. Just a purple and then I think it's a coral coloured Posca pen. This one again. This one's one of my favourites from this book. I actually stood Piccadilly Circus and I wasn't going to do a sketch. I'd already done 2 that day and I was a bit exhausted, and it was really nice weather. And the crowds were almost too much, but I managed to kind of set myself back and really take in the view and thought, no, why not? When am I going to be here again? So, and I'm really glad I did, actually. And if you look back on the post, I took a short film that I speeded up as well of the crowds, and it just gives you an idea of how many people walk through this particular spot, Eros, in Piccadilly Circus at any given moment. So I was really pleased I captured that. And again, this one, Eyre Street, just around the corner from Piccadilly Circus as well, Regent Street. It's fantastic architecture. This one I stopped and started. I must admit I went off for a coffee somewhere and came back to it because there was a lot of work involved. So overall, there's probably about 2, possibly 3 hours worth here, taking real care to get all the architecture right. And Boadicea Rebellion statue just opposite Big Ben and Houses of Parliament. This one didn't turn out so well, just because the lines that I'd introduced were the same colour as Big Ben, and it all kind of blended together a little bit too much. So not a successful one. But it was a good experience nonetheless. And St Pancras as you pull into the station. The canal that runs through, and people as well. People I'm just sort of getting back into recently, and whenever I'm out and about, especially in a big city like London, I always like to capture people as often as I can, and it's really for me just kind of being a little bit creative, a little bit silly with how I'm committing each person to the page. So you can see by this, you know, different sort of angles, switching the sketchbook round, and these are very, very quick observations. I'm just getting really the smallest, tiniest amount of detail on each person. And I think we're coming towards the end. This is Ramsgate as you walk down to the sea. Amsterdam was the only trip abroad this year, and I was there with my brother and his friend for 4 days. So it was really nice to kind of go off on my own for a couple of hours and do a bit of sightseeing and a bit of sketching. And I've been here a couple of times before, and it's a fantastic city. On every corner is a sketching opportunity. It's amazing. And again, using those kind of colour combinations that I rely on so well. So these ones are pretty bog standard. As happy as I am with them, they didn't take too long because I draw architecture quite a lot. And what I'm doing most recently with my newer sketchbook is things that I've sort of ended this sketchbook with, sketchbook number 9, which is colouring a whole page in a very bright colour, for example, and actually sketching people. So this is me sort of knowing that I needed to up my game and change my style just a little bit, just to experiment really, and drawing people in certain atmospheres. And this was a really nice afternoon, having a couple of drinks before we went on a boat tour, and really trying to sort of capture the essence of Amsterdam in the middle of summer. And I think that's it really. And this is me just kind of messing about with the pens as usual on the back of the sketchbook. So there we are, sketchbook number 9 from May 2021 to May 2022. So thanks again. I hope you enjoyed that walk through that particular sketchbook, sketchbook number 9. There'll be more popping up on my YouTube channel over the coming months. There's 8 more to come actually. The first one starting sketchbook 1, going way back to 2015. So tune in and thanks again. Happy sketching.